Okay, let's kick off. So, welcome everyone to today's Sifted Talks in partnership with Groupe ADP. We will be talking today about airports, specifically how to decarbonize them. While airports are global hubs which create lots of opportunities for their economies, the industry is responsible for nearly 5% of global carbon emissions. So we need to do something about that. So today we have Edward, who is Deputy CEO of Groupe ADP, one of the biggest airline operators in the world. We also have Emilie, who is CEO and co-founder of All the Way, a startup which takes your baggage from the Paris city centre and delivers it to your flight. Then we have Alan, who is COO of AEROVOLT, and that is a startup which is deploying a smart infrastructure for electric aviation across the UK and beyond. We also have Irwin, who is lead H2 Airport Operations Manager at Beyond Aero, a startup which is developing the world's first business aircraft using hydrogen. So we will also be taking questions throughout, so please submit them through the Q&A function. I will be able to read those and pick the most popular, so we'll ask them throughout, not at the end. So let's kick off. First of all, why is it so important that we decarbonize airports? Anyone feel free to jump in there.
Maybe. So, hi everyone. So maybe if I can start, this question of decarbonization is really not a question for us. During many years, it has been a question of license to grow. Are we allowed to growth of traffic, to travel around the world? Now, for our industry, decarbonization is a question of a license to operate, license to survive. So first of all, there is no choice. And we are fully committed to make it and to make it possible. And we know that there is no silver bullet. There is no one option. There will be a basket of a lot of options. Of course, better use of aviation. So how we can convince people to use aviation only when it is necessary and when it is good in our developed countries. Easy to understand, not so easy to explain to other countries around the world. So we have a huge responsibility for that. Another idea is how to change the mix of energy. And to do that, we have some solutions on the table, but some of them has to be invented. And we need some time to do that. And our responsibility as airport operator is to give this time to all the startups and all the industries to find these new solutions, especially in industry, in energy, sorry. And maybe a third idea I would like to share at the beginning of this session is that the better way to save CO2 emissions is not to build new infrastructures. So we have to do our best to operate in the existing ones and to avoid to build new ones. So it means digitalization, it means a new way to operate. And for that, we need to work with startups, and we need new ideas, new energy. And very happy to see with Emilie, Irwin, and Alan, some people really committed to do this job with us.
Great, and we'll move into the specific solutions a little bit later. But why is it important that startups are part of this decarbonization journey? Perhaps some of the other panelists could jump in.
I can jump in. So I think ultimately, when it comes to aviation, the industry does move quite slow. So there's a lot of systems and processes and manufacturing, and the way things are operated have been pretty much the same for, well, many decades now. And I think the way to actually enforce the change and bring about the change in aviation is going to be through startups, someone thinking a bit outside the box, a bit fresh, a bit more dynamic, bit more, go-getter sort of mentality. And I think, aviation, as I said, it is the sort of slowest industry. The development cycles for aviation for new aircraft are massive. Getting new infrastructure built of any kind at an airport, I mean, you think about even in the UK, you know, Gatwick and Heathrow have been talking about new runways for several decades now. So this is this part of the problem. There's an unwillingness to change to an extent, and also I think the perception of aviation to the general public is, you know, we're thinking about, you know, changing the way, you know, propulsion systems are done, and you know, battery or hydrogen technology or whatever it might be. But to most people, aviation is like, what is the cheapest flight I can get to my holiday in Mallorca? So because it is only that sort of 5% of the you know, the carbon makeup, should we say, it's almost like, well, it's fine, you know, I can just keep doing that and it's not a problem. But I think every industry has a responsibility to actually, you know, do their bit. And until you start changing the mindsets of people, it won't change. So there's a mindset to it. You know, when someone actually travels to another country, do they think, oh, is this actually a good idea? Did I need to travel if it was a business? And, you know, I'm taking 10 holidays a year or whatever it might be, you know. So there's an element to that as well. But ultimately, people are creatures of habit. They're not going to change. They're going to keep traveling as long as the prices are cheap and the planes are available and the destinations are there. So ultimately, it's regulation that's going to bring it about, and new technology that's going to make a viable business case for doing so.
Maybe I'd like to contribute as well. Question of why is it interesting for large company to collaborate with startup on the subject of sustainability? I would like to say, it's like Edward said, we have for a startup no other license to operate than being on a sustainability track. Because as a startup, we're so committed, we're such on a mission to have an impact. It's 100% of what we do, and you know, the journey forward. For large companies, I mean, they are incumbents, they have to deal with the past and they have to pivot, they have to transform. As you just said, Alan, it's a slow process. It doesn't happen overnight. And they have to deal with the history, the legacy. When we start up, we start from a clean slate and we're fully committed to have an impact. And this is just great. Working with large companies that are on a mission to change, to evolve, to change the license to operate is a great opportunity for startup. And I think we also do contribute to shaking things up, speeding things up. We do put pressure thanks to innovation and technology. We're showing the face, you know, the potential of technology, but we're also showing our commitments to have impact.
That's great. Some really great points about mindset and regulation there, which I'd like to talk about later. But let's dive into some of the solutions, and maybe we can turn first to aircraft themselves. How can we make those greener? This is perhaps one for Beyond Aero first.
Yes, and I was going to add something about why startups. I think it's also depending on the market you're addressing. So in our case, we're addressing the business aviation segment. Not per casualties, also because it's a market that is quite accessible for startup, because we have size of aircraft that are kind of small. So the idea is also to have a market that is accessible and a product that has a size that allows us to enter the market before 2030. So just about a quick overview of why startup. And secondly, so I'm Irvin, so I'm working at Beyond Aero, and we are building a hydrogen electric business aircraft. Hydrogen electric because we have gaseous hydrogen in tanks, which goes into fuel cells, which themselves produce electricity and heat. And after the electricity is then used to turn the electric motor and then turns the propeller. So that's a bit of the technology. And in our case, we are not integrated this hydrogen powertrain in existing aircraft. We are not doing a retrofit. We are just building the aircraft around this powertrain. So that's one of the main differentiator of the company, as well as the market it is targeting. And basically, we target 6 passengers on 1,500 kilometers. To stay also below 8.6 tons, as we are in CS23 certification. And we plan to enter into service in 2030. So that's in the coming years, that's coming soon. And so that's why we need to work closely with stakeholders and airports such as Groupe ADP on this adventure. And maybe what I can add is that in comparison with some retrofits. So on our case, when we are saying that we are building a new architecture of aircraft, it's for two reasons, basically. The first one is the positioning of the tanks that will change because of the volume and the mass of hydrogen. And the second is the cooling system. As you may know, fuel cells emit as much heat as they do electrical energy. So basically the whole powertrain must be cooled. And this is one of the main challenge associated to putting hydrogen into an aircraft. So that's why we have a particular air intake that we are redefining in the architecture of the aircraft. But yeah, for the rest, we try to stay as much conventional as we can because we still need to certify the aircraft. So of course, it's a big challenge. Yeah, I don't know if you want to tell me more about what we did and what we want to do, but basically it's a big project. We already developed a small scale powertrain, which was an 85 kilowatt powertrain. And basically, we integrated this powertrain in an existing aircraft, which is a two-seater aircraft called Blériot. And the good news is that he flew a few months ago, making France's first flying hydrogen electric aircraft. And this was a great milestone for the company. And so, yeah, that's just the proof that it's not just the future, it's the present, and we are starting from now on to decarbonize this segment.
That's really great. And but unfortunately, we can't have green aircraft without the infrastructure to support it. What kind of solutions are there for this? Alan, perhaps this is one for you.
Yeah, so AEROVOLT, in a nutshell, you could think of as like the InstaVolt, GridServe, Osprey of aircraft charging. So we were one of the first, I think probably the first to actually get a public available electric charger for aviation installed on an airfield. And we've only been going a year and a half realistically, I suppose. But the thing is, when we first approached multiple airports, aerodromes about it, when our CEO is actually my brother in 2022, we were sort of laughed out the room a little bit to start with. It was kind of like, oh, you want to stick a charger on the airfield, what's the point? There's no planes. There's only 10 electric aircraft in the UK and a few sort of R&D projects, etc. But what's interesting about it, one of our team actually, he's from the car charging world. So he actually worked for InstaVolt. He was part of the McDonald's, getting all the InstaVolt chargers at McDonald's, and worked for Siemens and Zaptec and a few other electric projects. And he said, it's like being in a time machine with this. It's like you're going back and having the same conversations from 10 years ago when people were sort of laughing at, well, what's the point of putting a charger in for an aircraft? Or charging for a car, sorry, when there's no cars. Everyone's laughing at the idea of having an electric car. A couple of years later, Tesla comes along, changes the game. They bring the chicken and egg solution at the same time with their network, and all of a sudden, everyone's scrambling to build, their electric cars, and the legacy OEMs are looking to change everything. So I think that is about to happen in aviation in a different way. So as you make the infrastructure available, then the mindset changes. I mean, when we first started installing chargers, when we put the very first one, actually, remember on the Isle of Wight, there were some pilots landing and coming up to us afterwards, go, what's this? This was a charger for an aircraft. And like, what? There aren't any planes. And now there's actually, there's more chargers everywhere. And now there's companies going, actually, we can buy more aircraft and operate in here, and we can do this and the other. So it's sort of, it's getting that sort of mindset change, as I said before. And I think infrastructure is one of the toughest sells of anything, anywhere. It's very easy to have the nice glossy aircraft on your display at Farnborough, and everyone's coming up and patting themselves on the back and shaking their hands and going, this is amazing, but you can't actually go anywhere yet. So this is one of the factors about it. And I think infrastructure is sort of almost like the boring bit that no one really wants to think about. But it is the key to everything. And the EV, car industry has taken a bit of a hit because the infrastructure hasn't kept up pace with, development of the vehicles. And with China now coming all force now with the amount of cars, and they're really, really changing the game now. That's obviously about to happen with aviation as well, with the CATL now have tested their aircraft. The infrastructure is going to become a really big part of all this. And obviously that's where we come in, and we're engaged with, I think, pretty much every airport in the UK now, certainly apart from your Gatwicks and your Heathrows and Luton, Stansted, etc. I think everyone's had a visit from our team, to get a charger in. And yeah, that's essentially what we're doing, is that we're going around. It's a carbon copy essentially of the car industry. Go around, get your charger in the ground, build the infrastructure. It is vastly more complicated though for aviation. There's a lot more regulation around it. There's a lot more systems and software that's required that pilots are going to expect as well. So the integration into your ATIS systems, that's something that we're doing. So when an aircraft is coming into an airport, they'll actually be able to tune into the ATIS, the runway surface management, surface conditions and weather, etc. And actually will tell them that a charger is available or not available. So that's sort of integrating into the traditional aviation systems there. There's things we've got going on with NATS and ATC as well for the NOTAM systems as well for charging. And just in general, the whole idea of booking charging. So that's something that has been tried in the EV charging world already, not with brilliant success. I mean, there's some elements of the trucking companies using that, obviously, for because you've got scheduled movements, but no one's ever going to take off from an airfield and go to another airfield not knowing 100% they can charge and come back. That's sort of a non-starter. So that's a really key part of the system. We have the software that goes with our squadron system that works with the charging network. But yeah, we've only been going a year or so really, and it's we're already getting offers from Australia and America and New Zealand and other places in Europe to come and put networks out, because I think seeing it for real and seeing it in the ground available for use has definitely started to spur the conversation. And also all the OEMs for the eVTOLs have started calling now saying, we want to come and test on your network, and we want to come and how can we all work together, etc. So yeah, infrastructure's the boring bit, but it's the bit that really matters at the end of the day. It's that no one's going anywhere without anything.
That's true. And building on the infrastructure point, airports themselves are quite carbon intensive, and passengers are just increasing. So the passenger flow is increasing. Emilie, perhaps you could talk about your solution and how it helps with that.
Yeah, thank you. All the way we operate more passenger side, so we're not on the air side. What we see is we believe we're driving the future of smart and green airports. Because we're offering an off-airport baggage solution. And it's very important because, talking about infrastructure, air traffic is set to double by 2040. And our services enable passengers to check in their luggage at various city locations on departure, and on arrival, have their bags delivered directly to the final destination. So basically, this approach, it supports airports in cutting carbon emission on three main points: reducing infrastructure saturation, improving operational efficiency, and enabling passengers to change their mobility behavior. But I want to touch on the first 2 points. With the infrastructure saturation, as Edward say, you can't create additional square meters. This is very carbon intensive. And so what's happening is major airports, they're facing limitations in expanding. And so that both impacts their operational efficiencies and their passengers' satisfaction, which has a later impact on revenue. So what we see is all the way helps alleviate this by lowering baggage checking at city locations in hotels, convention centers, and we effectively create additional space. By reducing congestion, it's like you could think about us by digitalizing the whole process. It's like we create additional square meters everywhere. We create mini airports everywhere. I would say it's like upcycling of urban spaces. So, for example, we go to co-working spaces that are not maximizing the use of their square meters. We go to hotels, we go to convention center, creating mini airports pop up for luggage. And so this is very much the beginning. We're very young. We're only 1 year old in operation, but we are on a journey that's very, impactful to mean that we are on the way to create a solution to reduce costs and to maximize environmental impacts of that need to serve a growing number of passengers.
That's great. Some really great solutions there. But for any of them to work, you need to collaborate with airports. So I'm wondering what kind of tips you have for collaborating together. Edward, perhaps you could jump in here.
Yes. Well, first of all, I would like to thank Emilie, because her solution is really impressive, and we have very good return and feedback from the passengers, and that's we need also way on our platforms and airports. So another example could be the use of LiDAR, and we have worked a lot with Outside, a startup very well known now, and LiDAR is a very good solution to monitor and control passenger flows, and as I mentioned, and as Emilie mentioned, avoid new needs in terms of infrastructure. So we can use the same one for a growing number of passengers. And so with LiDAR, with LiDAR sensors, we can then count all the passengers in the real time, not only in the same room, but also on different levels, to follow them, of course, on an anonymous basis, to follow the flows around the airport, to be able to have to equip border crossing and safety gates, and to have enough employees on these gates. We have shared this solution now with border control police, and maybe some of you have been in Paris. We have worked a lot with French police in order to increase the number of policemen and to make this control as easy as possible. And now we publish the waiting time, and we can, with the same number of gates, welcome more passengers. So that's an example. We have a lot of them, but all these solutions allow us to have a better use of the terminal, and so we have been able not to build a new one since now a lot of years. We will need other ones, of course, but later as possible.
Okay, and for the startups, what has it been like working with airports, and what's the value of collaboration there?
I can answer a bit of that because we've dealt with quite a few, not really big airports, obviously, but plenty of smaller regional locations. I think the thing is, when it comes to certainly the smaller regional airports, the considerations and what they're after is sort of different, I would say. I mean, they're not looking at passenger numbers some of the time, so they might be looking at a lot of aircraft movement. So, as an example, somewhere like Lid or Brighton City, where we have chargers there, I mean, they have somewhere like 42,000 movements a year, I think, and that's, in retrospect, that is about a quarter of the aircraft movements, let's say, that someone like Gatwick might have, but it's obviously much smaller aircraft, etc. But their concerns are far more on the local level. They're dealing with the council, they're dealing with, we can't have this many more aircraft movements a year because there's noise complaints. They can't operate beyond a certain time on a Sunday. So like Goodwood, you've literally got 2 o'clock cut off on a Sunday, etc., etc. But the thing is that electrification obviously does offer this, lower noise option. So the considerations they have far more on that local level. They worry about people going to their cafe or going to, buying the bacon butty, or how many landings they're going to get over a year. But in order to sort of advance, let's say, the more regional travel, I think a quieter aircraft is definitely a good solution, and it's something that they would embrace. And that's something we've certainly found, actually, because they're thinking long term. They're thinking about in many years to come. Can they they're going to win their fight with the council? Someone like Redhill, for example. I mean, they've been at war with the local residents for ages. So yeah, offering these newer solutions, to actually give them hope, let's say, that they can continue, because a lot of airfields have closed down, certainly in the UK. Quieter aircraft, more efficient, and actually try and get more high utilization at these more regional airports is something that I think we should definitely be working towards, and electrification does offer some of that.
Yeah, in addition to that, so in our case, we are starting some pre-feasibility studies with major airports in business aviation, so including Le Bourget Airport, one of the first airport in business aviation in Europe, operated by Groupe ADP. And so what does it mean? It means studying how to supply and distribute hydrogen on the airports. And so to do that, we need to work closely with airports and also energy providers, meaning producer and distributor of hydrogen. And we need to understand how the airport works today for the fuel management, to have a clear view on all potential usage of H2 on the airports, whether air side, but land side too, to be able to size the infrastructure on a specific area on the airport. And after, we'll be able to then choose one of the supply and distribution scenario to put in place and start development studies. And of course, after that, we'll have to study the operational impact of having such aircraft on the apron of the airports, depending on the chosen distribution scenario. So merci, everything of what I mentioned, the idea is to have a clear view of what is feasible, and after do some specific study with specific airports on what can be applied to specific airports, because that's one of the main constraints to this, is that all airports are different. All airports have different area, different activities, etc. So we need to adapt every technology to each of them, and of course minimize the infrastructure and try to at least see how it's working today and how we can adapt with less changes for the airports, because it still have to be of course an investment for them, so and for the companies. So it's a big point and a big subject we need to add in the project. And on our case, we are also based on gaseous hydrogen, not liquid, because we want to enter the market in 2030. But we are convinced that, of course, after that, in the coming years and with commercial aviation too, it will go liquid. So there is also this question of how we can still have some gaseous hydrogen from a liquid infrastructure, in order for the future to be able to still be able to operate our product. And so that's, of course, a big subject in relation to big companies such as Airbus and other players. So yeah, that's a lot of subjects, a lot of topics to cover, but it's a real advantage to have actors such as ADP that is really keen to progress and to work on the subject with us.
There's one thing I'd like to add as well, actually. So one thing we've learned from putting chargers at airports is that immediately, I think maybe for the first time, they're viewing electrification as fuel. You know, this is a potential replacement for fuel in the future. I think up until that point, it's been quite sort of niche, you know, people charging in the hangar, you know, plugging into the general socket, etc. But ultimately, what we found now is the airports, they're going, oh, we've got a charger here now. This is a revenue stream for us in the future, and you know, they're obviously considering that. I mean, in 2025, there's the avgas ban effectively comes into force, where tetraethyl lead additives is banned from European refineries. So fuel has to be imported from Saudi or the States, and it's probably at least going to go 50% double. So about 30 to 40% of all GA aircraft are literally not going to be able to fly for the same price they do now from May 25. So the shift in that is going to automatically focus, well, what others options are coming? You know, hydrogen's an option, electrification's an option, but for the aerodrome or for the airport, fuel is a big revenue stream for them. So they're going to be considering those elements as, you know, a survival aspect of, well, what money can we make out of this? And I mean, when we plonked our charger actually in Brighton City, the management there were like, no one is charging anywhere else. This is the charger. This is where we get a revenue. I mean, we've only had a few flights in to charge, admittedly, but that's the thinking process. You know, they are businesses, so they're not just thinking, you know, the sustainability element, they are thinking future revenue as well.
Maybe if I can just add something. Clearly, after this COVID crisis and when we see this huge challenge of decarbonization, we know that airports will be an hub of energy. So we move from a world where airports were only dedicated and fully dedicated to aircraft. And we just considered that the last liter of kerosene will be for aviation, to a world where airport has to move to a hub of energy, hub of intermodality and hub of energy. So it means that we don't know what will be the key. We just know that we will need everything. We will need more electricity. We will need SAF, sustainable aviation fuel. we will need hydrogen. We don't know if it will be for huge aircraft, middle aircraft, small aircraft, or for just ground operations. But we will have to be a friendly place for hydrogen. That's the reason why we work with Air Liquide and Airbus in order to have a good appreciation of what the need in terms of land, what the need in terms of electricity, what the need in terms of new regulation for safety, security, for instance. What will be the economic model? And thanks Alan to have mentioned it, because for some airports, not in ADP, but for some of them, fuel is a large source of revenues. For us, not. So it is maybe more easy to work on it when we have not this economic link to kerosene. But for me, the main challenge is to work is acceptability, because people living around are not aware about hydrogen and all these new challenges. So we have to convince people that it is very good for the planet, good for aviation, but also good for them. And just one last example, sorry to be a little bit long. But if we have a huge quantity of electricity and hydrogen, it can be used for airports, aviation, aircraft, ground operation, as I mentioned. But it can also be used for industry, for the buses, school buses, or all the need of local governments. So an airport move from a place where you have some jobs, but maybe some noise, to a place where you can have a level for other industries and other activities that also can improve the quality of life of people living around.
Great, and you touched on it a little bit there, but we've had a question specifically about SAF, which is what role do airports play in the SAF ecosystem and how should startups approach them? Perhaps, Edward, this is another one for you.
So SAF is the best solution we have in our hands now. We know that a lot of aircrafts can use SAF, and so the question of SAF is the availability of enough quantity of SAF and the question of price. We have an airport which is called Le Bourget, just close to Paris, which is the first airport for private aviation in Europe and sanitary aviation in Europe, continental Europe. And in Le Bourget, you can find all the SAF you need. And just to give you an example, in 1 year, the quantity requested by our customers has been increased by 300%. So we know that the demand is there. Demand for private jet, of course, because when you see all the challenges of acceptability that private jet have to face, they need SAF and they use SAF, but also more and more in global aviation, globally speaking. So we have to do our best to convince all the industry, energy industry, to give us and make more SAF available, and to allow us to fulfill the requests of the European authorities to have an incorporation rate, which will allow us to be as decarbonized as possible, as quick as possible.
And we've talked a little bit about mindset throughout this panel, but how important is it to change customers' mindset, and what's the role of regulation in decarbonization?
For regulation, you mentioned, Stephanie, sorry.
Sorry, I mentioned the question was about mindset, so changing consumers' mindset, and then also the role of regulation.
Okay, maybe I can answer on regulation and let the other panelists and on the mindset and regulation, of course, but just on regulation, very in a nutshell. We have to convince that we have to be paid for decarbonization's investment. And aviation has always financed by itself its need in terms of capex and infrastructure. that's a huge difference compared to railway industry, for instance. And we can do that because the customers are ready to pay for that. But we have to convince the regulator that when we invest in a new hydrogen plant, for instance, and when we invest when we have some investment to allow electricity national network to make some huge investment around the airports, it is as runway, as terminals, as all the other aviation's infrastructure. So that's the main topic today, and we are working a lot on it.
For us, in relation to clients, maybe a bit more on this. So on our case, so our clients are both airlines, but also private jet owners. So it's quite obvious I would say the public image of this person that is going to that is increasing, and that the fly shaming is more active at the moment. So that's a big subject. But now we have like more than 600 million of LOI that we sign with clients that keep asking us when the aircraft will be available and so on. So there is a need, a market need. And that's a big subject, and that's a big good news for a company that is sure about the market need. And on our case, we know that business aviation, so of course there is an urgent needs of decarbonization, but also the range, the mean range of these aircrafts, it's around like we have 80% of flights that are below 1,500 kilometers, which is that it's huge, and that's basically what we are targeting as a product. So there is a need. We are working on technology that can cover this need, and we are working really closely with our clients to be sure that the product will fit their need. For example, we are organizing some roundtables with our clients to have their view on the design, on some aspects related to operation, some aspects related to the interior of the aircraft, because it will change. The aircraft will not be the same as it is today, and so we need to work with them to to progress and to have the progression in this mindset, and this is changing, and we can see it directly with the clients.
I think as well,
like
you need to.
Oh,
sorry. I was just going to add to that. So I think a lot of it comes down to choice of the customer, really. So if you've got an option to fly sustainably, or if you have an option to fly traditionally, the customer, if you have that choice available to the customer in any way, then the question really comes about whether, what choice are they going to make? And that often could come down to price, come down to various other factors. But I think ultimately that's the key to it, is if you don't offer the solution, then you won't have, it's almost not a case of mindset. It's like, if the first generations of aircraft that come out are actually, they're going to be range limited compared to, the fuel, the jet fuel equivalents, jet equivalents. And it's whether those people are really prepared to compromise. And I think that is sometimes more of a challenge. I mean, that was obviously the first issue with EVs when they came out. It was very much a case of whether they don't go as far. Am I prepared to have a vehicle that won't go as far as this other traditional vehicle that is easy to fill up and all this sort of stuff? So I think it's a balancing act between, you've got to offer the consumer product. As Steve Jobs says, you start with the customer experience and work backwards. If you offer that product and then it does offer the sustainable solution, then you've got to create the experience around it to get the sale of it. Otherwise, you're just offering something that's just not going to be, commercially viable. So I think, it comes down to offering the choice first of a sustainable option and a viable sustainable option. You've got to make that step first, and then work out where is the best solution for that particular aircraft, or who's going to use. So if it's a private jet, is that customer flying 1,000 miles every day, or are they flying 200 miles every day? It's finding that balancing act to start with. I think there will be people who will take it up, but it is a challenge, though. I think it might be that we have to have aircraft that will just go straight in, and do those sort of 500-mile regional ranges. Otherwise, they'll just get laughed out of the room. So that's my sort of concern with it. I think, and we see that in general aviation as well. Immediately, most pilots might only do a half-hour flight, but they want an aircraft that will go 4 hours. So I think it's going to have exactly the same challenges as the EV car market. When the aircraft do achieve those ranges, then you've got the choice then, and then it's really about how can you make it economically viable to go sustainable. That's my view on that.
I would like just to add to the discussion on people's behavior, and also on the question of, do you have to pay a higher price to cut on your carbon footprint emission? What we see all the way is that not only we're improving airport infrastructure, but we're also enabling a shift toward more sustainable passenger mobility. All the way is a very popular product. It's not a VIP product. I mean, we cater to families, to senior, to people with reduced mobility. We have huge family traveling to Africa, to North Africa. Very popular service. And what we see on the ground every day is that we have 60% of our users using public transportation to go to the airport. What it means is, it's a small step. It's a very humble impact, but at least you can see in the behavior that when you're putting an innovation on the market and you have this ability to change people's behavior to a more sustainable mobility option. And this is just very encouraging to see that we can just foster this, modal shift to greener mobility option. And it's just the first step. I think the next step, the bigger subject for us tomorrow is going to be what we call intermodal travel. Is how do we make planes and trains working together? We were talking about airports becoming energy hub. I think they're going to become more and more mobility hubs with train and planes having to work together. And I think if passengers are very ready to make that move to change their mobility, I think the baggage is an issue. Obviously, I'm speaking for all the way, but we do think that we need to bring innovation to make that change happen of how people move in a more sustainable way.
That's great, and a great place to end as well. We've just got 1 minute left of the panel. Thank you to everyone who's joined. I'm really sorry if we didn't get to your question, but hopefully you found some useful insights anyway. Thank you to all of the panelists for your insights, and to our partner Groupe ADP for their support.